Julia sih gimana pertanyaannya yaitu
Hello everyone. Kedengeran nggak, Miss? Hah?
Hello.
Hello everyone. We are about to begin the journal lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, please turn on your camera and make sure your microphone is on mute. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone is doing good today. Welcome to General Lecture, Practical Application of Educational Psychology for Teachers. This event is part of Educational Psychology subject, and this General Lecture is organized by the MKDK team from the Faculty of Education, Universitas Negeri Medan in cooperation with Trobe University, Australia. Everyone, it is such an honor for me here to be here. Before I introduce myself, let me thank you to the committees who had worked to make this event possible, and also to all the participants who have joined us this morning. My name is Puan Audia Zahra. I am a student of Early Childhood Education Program, Faculty of Education, Universitas Negeri Medan. Honorable the Dean Faculty of Education Universitas Negeri Medan, Professor Dr. Yusnadi MS. Honorable Vice Dean Academic Faculty of Education, Memnani Barora Nasution, SPC, MA, PhD. Honorable Vice Dean Human Capital, Dr. Zuraida Lubis, MPD Cons. Honorable Vice Dean Student Affairs, Mem Kamtini, SPD MPD, Honorable, our special guest from Trobe University, Australia, Dr. Kylie Murphy, and Honorable all the lecturers of Mata Kuliah Kependidikan MKDK Psikologi Pendidikan, and last but not least, Honorable our blessed participant today. First of all, let us all say thanks to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala who has been giving us His mercy and blessing till we can gather here in this right place with healthy condition. Secondly, let us send our salawat and salam to our beloved Prophet Nabi Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 7 agendas for this occasion. First, opening. Second, listening to National Anthem Indonesia Raya. Third, praying. Fourth, welcoming speech by Vice Dean to Faculty of Education, Dr. Zuraida Lubis, MPD Cons. Fifth, photo session. Sixth, general lecture and followed by Q&A session. And the last but not least is closing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let us listen to the National Anthem Indonesia Raya. Everyone should be in silent and sit with perfect manner. All right, thank you so much. Next, we are going to move to the third agenda, praying. Everyone, let's pray together according to our belief and religion. Praying begins. Praying finished. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to listen to welcoming speech by Vice Dean to Faculty of Education, Dr. Zuraida Lubis, MPD Cons. To Ma'am Zuraida, time and screen is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Puji dan syukur, marilah kita panjatkan kepada Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, Tuhan yang Maha Esa, yang telah memberikan kesehatan kepada kita dan kemauan untuk mengikuti kuliah umum MKDK dengan topik Practical Application of Educational Psychology for Teachers. Yang sama-sama kita hormati Dr. Kylie Murphy, Senior Lecturer in Educational Psychology and Pedagogy School of Education, Trobe University, Australia, yang telah bersedia mengorbankan waktu dan meluangkan waktunya, bahkan bersedia mentransformasikan ilmunya kepada kita semua, keluarga besar FIP, khususnya yang terlibat pada mata kuliah Psikologi Pendidikan MKDK. Kita yakin dan percaya pemikiran-pemikiran kritis dan analitis yang nanti akan disampaikan beliau sebagai narasumber merupakan sesuatu yang harus kita miliki sebagai pelaku akademisi. Yang sama-sama kita hormati Bapak Dekan Fakultas Ilmu Pendidikan Universitas Negeri Medan, Bapak Profesor Dr. Yusnadi MS, Ibu Wakil Dekan 1, Ibu Nani Barorah PhD, Ibu Wakil Dekan 3, Ibu Kamtini MPD, dan para guru besar, para dosen, dan khususnya kepada para mahasiswa yang mengikuti kegiatan ini. Seperti sama-sama kita ketahui, bahwa psikologi pendidikan merupakan materi yang sangat penting yang harus dimiliki oleh seorang calon guru atau pendidik yang membantunya memahami perilaku belajar siswa untuk menemukan solusi dari masalah yang sedang dihadapi dan menjelaskan apakah siswa dalam keadaan baik untuk belajar. Belajar psikologi pendidikan itu berarti belajar tentang aspek psikologi siswa. Kita di sini banyak memiliki dosen-dosen yang latar belakang psikologi pendidikan, psikologi khususnya, yang mungkin nanti akan mampu mengeluarkan pendapat yang sangat bernas dan berdiskusi dengan narasumber untuk bisa membuahkan satu hasil yang terbaik. Nah, jadi kalau kita berpikiran kepada calon guru, mereka tentu memiliki bekal dasar dalam melaksanakan teknik pembelajaran yang efektif ketika mereka itu menguasai ilmu psikologi pendidikan. Ya, jadi termasuk juga dalam belajar psikologi pendidikan dipelajari juga strategi dalam pembelajaran, kemudian yang disampaikan guru kepada siswa apakah dimengerti oleh siswa dengan baik atau tidak. Jadi jelas sekali bahwa penting bagi kita untuk mengikuti kuliah umum ini. Semoga kita dapat berdiskusi dengan beliau dari awal sampai akhir kegiatan ini bisa kita ikuti. Demikianlah sambutan dari saya mewakili pimpinan. Semoga kita dapat aktif dalam kegiatan ini. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, what a pleasant speech. Thank you so much, Ma'am Zuraida. Now we are arriving in the photo session. We invite all the participants to turn on your camera and give your best smile. The committee will take the screenshot. Okay, we are going to take the picture now from page 1, page 2, page 3. Okay, done. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time that we've been waiting for. We're going to enter the main event, general lecture, practical application of educational psychology for teachers. This section will be led by my colleague Elviani Sinaga as moderator. So moderator, time and screen is yours.
Thank you, Puan, for giving me the opportunity. Hello, everyone. I am Elviani, a first-year student of Guidance and Counseling Faculty of Education, Universitas Negeri Medan. I am here standing as a moderator and will guide this discussion about practical applications of educational psychology for teachers with Dr. Kylie Murphy. All right, everyone. Before I get the session to Dr. Kylie, let me introduce her. Dr. Kylie is currently a senior lecturer at the School of Education, Trobe University, Australia. She pursued her bachelor degree in applied psychology and holds a PhD degree from MIT, Australia in the field of educational psychology. Besides being a lecturer, Dr. Kylie is interested to research about the nexus between psychology-informed teacher education and professional practice. She is also interested in how the sense of learning can contribute to more effective and inclusive teaching of critical and creative thinking in schools. She is really open to collaboration with industry partners, especially participatory action research projects. All right, without any longer, let me invite Dr. Kylie to deliver her speech. Hello, Dr. Kylie, how are you?
I am very well, thank you. It's an absolute honor and privilege to be invited to speak with you all. Thank you so much. And I must say, I'm really delighted to be able to speak to you all about one of my favourite subjects, which is educational psychology, and in particular the practical applications and how teachers can use educational psychology knowledge in their teaching practice. So I'm always happy to talk about that topic because I'm so passionate about it. And can I just say as well, I've never spoken at an Indonesian university before, but I really enjoyed the energetic, lovely music at the start of this conference. I love the use of music. That is not something that happens at the beginning of conferences in Australia so much. So I really enjoyed that. That was wonderful. Now, I assume that I can share my screen. Give me just a moment to set that up, and I'll just I think I've pinned myself so I could just get all of the other faces out of the way. Okay, so yes, hello everybody. It's about midday in Australia at the moment, so hello from Australia, and very happy to be talking to you, as I said, about the topic of educational psychology in teaching practice. Just a little bit about myself before we move on, just by way of, a little bit of background so you know who I am before I start talking about today's topic. I did, as was mentioned, I did my Bachelor of Education, majoring in psychology. I then went on and did secondary teaching junior science in lower high school and senior psychology for about 9 years. And then I did some parenting education work and child and parent counselling for a few years. And at the end of that, I did my PhD in educational psychology. That it was at RMIT University in Melbourne. I then worked with some academics as an educational developer, specialising, supporting higher education academics in their teaching. And then I started working as a lecturer, lecturing psychology, research methods, research literacy, and evidence-based practice. And now currently I'm working as a senior lecturer in educational psychology and pedagogy in the School of Education at La Trobe University. And of course, that's the topic that I'm talking to you about today, educational psychology. Because I'm not sure how much you have all covered about this topic, I thought I might just start really broadly and just make sure that we're all aware of what psychology, educational psychology is, starting with psychology most broadly, which is the scientific study of thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. That's a good way to summarise what the whole field of psychology is about. And educational psychology is a subset of that. It actually draws on a number of different specific branches of psychology. So it's actually a mix of different psychology disciplines when we think about educational psychology. Educational psychology draws on neuroscience, about how the brain works and neurons in the brain. Cognitive psychology, which is the study of how learning, memory, and thinking happen. It also draws on behavioural psychology, which is how new behaviours are learned and how behaviours are changed, and a number of other topics as well, including developmental psychology, learning disorders, motivation psychology, assessment and psychometrics. There are a lot of different topics that fall under the umbrella of educational psychology. But today I'm going to be focusing on in just 1 hour, a small part of educational psychology, drawing on relevant aspects of neuroscience and cognitive psychology and behavioral psychology, with a particular focus on how to teach higher order thinking skills. So it will eventually get to how the ideas that I start talking about relate to teaching higher order thinking skills towards the end of the lecture. But when I will just say now that when I say higher order thinking skills, in particular, I'm thinking about critical thinking skills and creative thinking skills. So let's start on the journey. First of all, today's lecture, I'm going to be focusing really on the idea of connections and how connections underpin learning and what educational psychology tells us about the importance of connections. I'm talking about, first of all, connections between neurons in the brain, drawing on neuroscience knowledge, how new knowledge is formed via connections between neurons in our brain. Secondly, the connections between and within mental schemas, which draws on cognitive psychology, where we'll look at how what schemas are, and they are mental representations of interconnected ideas, and I'll try to emphasize the importance of teachers always thinking about how to guide their students in constructing and consolidating schemas in their minds. So schemas will be the second focus of today's lecture. And then I'll finish by looking at the importance of connections between behaviours and feelings, and that's drawing on behavioural psychology, how new behaviours are learned, how behaviours are changed through behaviour/feeling association. So we'll get to that at the end of the lecture. First of all, let's start by thinking about connections between neurons, what that means and why it's important. And you can see here an expanded magnified neurons here with some connections with other neurons. Connections are being made between neurons in our brain all the time. A lot of our brain is firing, sending messages from lots of neurons to other neurons, making connections all the time, which is what's depicted in this sort of model here. This is a photo of just a few neurons, but there are millions and millions of neurons that make up our brain. We don't need to be, teachers don't need to be neuroscientists. We don't need to know about the detailed sort of structure and function of neurons. Certainly, just for the purposes of today's lecture, we just need to understand that neurons are the cells that make up our nervous system, including our brain. So our nervous system goes right throughout our body, but one of the biggest parts of our nervous system is the brain, and neurons are simply the millions and millions and millions of tiny little cells that make up our brain. Why are neurons so important? Why are neuron connections so important for teachers? The short answer is that new knowledge is formed in the form, it's stored in our brains in the form of connections between neurons. So at a physiological level, that's how knowledge is actually built and stored in our brains. Thinking involves messages being transmitted between neurons in the different parts of our brain. So we've got messages being sent from from and to different parts of our brain to do different thinking operations, and those messages are transmitted via neurons, transmitted from one neuron to another, to another, to another, all the time. That's happening. When neurons transmit messages to other neurons, we say that neural connections or pathways are formed. And repeated activation of neural pathways or neural connections produces stronger memory traces. So the more often the same neurons fire and the same connections are activated, the stronger our memories become. And the more pathways that we form, the more neural pathways, allow memories that are stored in other parts of our brain to be triggered or cued by another thought or experience or sensation or memory. So in other words, the more pathways we have, neural pathways we have around a particular memory, the more accessible that memory is, or the more readily retrievable that memory is. So pathways, neural connections, and multiple neural connections for a single memory make that memory more able to be retrieved or recalled when we need it. We can have memories that are in our brain, but just hard to retrieve when we need it. Obviously, those memories are not so useful. We need to be able to easily retrieve memories when we need them in order for our memories to be useful, and in order to be able to say that we've really learned material and can remember it and use knowledge when we need it. So pathways, neural pathways, and having multiple neural pathways for our stored memories are really helpful for good learning, where we can actually recall and use the knowledge that we've learned. So in summary, having neural connections, making neural connections, and creating multiple neural pathways is the basis for memory and learning. So neuron connections are absolutely fundamental and vital in the process of learning. The question for teachers is, how do we use that knowledge? What should we do about that? How can we help our students, our learners, to form strong neural connections? There are two sayings that I would love you to all remember after today. And that is, the first saying is, neurons that fire together wire together, become connected. And the other saying is, use it or lose it. So let's think about this first saying, neurons that fire together wire together. We need to, as teachers, try to facilitate strong neural connections in our learners' brains by helping them or having them think about the connections between the ideas that we're teaching them. Think about multiple things at the same time, and that will help the neuron connections to form. If we're teaching a new concept, we need to try to help encourage and facilitate the students thinking about that new concept at the same time as thinking about other concepts that they might already know. Or you might be teaching 2 or 3 new concepts. It's important to have your learners think about how those multiple concepts link to each other, how they relate to each other. And if learners think about multiple things, 2 or more things at the same time, that is going to help to form neural connections, which will make their memory stronger and will make their memory easier to retrieve when they need to remember what they've learned. So that's one way that we can help our learners form stronger neural connections or neuron connections. And when neuron connections form, what happens is we also form mental associations, which is what learning is. And one memory will then be able to trigger multiple other memories, and that will help in memory retrieval, being able to cue and recall learned knowledge when we need it. The second saying, use it or lose it, summarizes the fact that neuron connections that are not reactivated become weak, and eventually we can lose those connections, and that is how forgetting happens. If we don't reactivate those neuron connections, forgetting can happen. One of the best ways to avoid that happening is to facilitate in our learners practice at retrieving what they have learned. So when a learner learns something initially and it's still sitting in their memory because they learned it not too long ago, the process of actively recalling to their mind what they have learned will strengthen those neuron connections really powerfully, much more powerfully than just rereading the information or hearing the information again or seeing it again. The process of actually retrieving it from their own memory will strengthen those connections more than just hearing or seeing it again. Any repetition can strengthen neural pathways. Any repetition is valuable and helps to information to stick in our long-term memory. But the most powerful form of repetition is the repetition where we don't use our books, don't consult any notes. We just actually try to remember from our own minds the information while it's still in our memory. That's the best way to have that, to get that information in our long-term memory as strongly and for as long as possible. So retrieval practice is really powerful for avoiding forgetting or minimizing how much of that information is going to be forgotten over time. So use it, use your memory, or lose the memory. The other form of connection that I wanted to focus on today are the connections between what we call schema and or schemas, plural. There's the plural for schema is schemas. You might also read that the plural of schema is schemata. That's another way of saying schemas, but I tend to say schemas. What is a schema? Schemas are organized or clustered mental representations of things, events, behaviors, and concepts. Like our memories, but schemas are the way organized groups of memories, the way that they are interconnected in our minds. So this idea of interconnection is what makes a schema a schema. It's when bits of knowledge are interconnected in our minds by connections that we actually understand. And when stored knowledge is stored in items that are interrelated and connected in the ways that we understand, we can call those bundles of bits of knowledge schemas. And that's how knowledge is stored in our minds and is stored most strongly. If we try to just remember individual, unrelated bits of knowledge, it's very hard to remember much at all. But when we can link new bits of knowledge to other bits of knowledge and have that knowledge sit together in schemas, simple schemas can then link up with other simple schemas and become more complex schemas. And then we can have overarching networks of schemas. that's how knowledge is stored in our minds, in our memories, and it is connected to the neuronal basis of memory. But when we talk about schemas, we're not talking about neurons, we're talking about ideas in the person's mind rather than the physiology of neurons. As I said, we can combine bits of simple schemas into complex schemas. We construct schema or schemas in our own minds. So schemas are not something we are taught. Teachers can teach knowledge and try to establish schemas in the learner's mind, but schemas are what we as individuals, the associations that we make between concepts in our minds are our own way of building our own schemas, and teachers can try to influence the learner's schema building or schema construction, but schemas are actually something that only the learner can really build, and only the learner can really sort of know. So schemas are something that is constructed by the learner, but teachers absolutely should try to facilitate and guide that schema construction, trying to ensure that there are clear, accurate and strong connections within our learners' schema or schematic networks. And if you think about schema all the time when you're teaching, it will help you to teach more effectively, because you'll be thinking about the connections that your learners are making, or that we hope they are making. If your learners are not making many connections, they are not learning very well, and you aren't teaching very effectively. But if you can teach in a way that encourages schemas to be built and more complex schemas to be built, that's the most effective teaching that you can do. Just remember that schemas are all sorts of things. We can have schemas for about an object, or about a person, about an event, about a skill, how to do something, so a behavior, or any concept, any academic concept as well. So schema is a very broad idea. It applies to all of those things that can be learned. Let's have a look at a simple schema. A child might have a schema for food in their mind, and their schema might include that food is something that you can eat. Food stops me feeling hungry. It tastes good, comes from a shop, and my family sometimes doesn't have enough food. So that might be a particular learner's schema for food. If we were going to be teaching that learner about food chains a little bit later in schooling, and then ecosystems, which are topics in biology, we would need to just be thinking about what the child's schema for food is, and make sure that that schema is as accurate and comprehensive enough to enable them to learn the more complex concept of food chain. So, for example, we would need to just make sure that, in the child's schema for food, they also have an understanding that food is a source of energy, a source of fuel for surviving, and that food, it does come from a shop, but all food comes from something that was once living. So all food comes from something that is living or that once was living. And if they've got that understanding of food, as part of their schema for food, they will learn about food chains and ecosystems more effectively than if they'd only had this understanding of what food means. Obviously, schema can be much more complex than that. all of us have many very complex schema. We don't necessarily think about it, day to day. We're not necessarily aware of all of the schemas that exist in our minds. But this is an example of a schema that someone might have, all connected around the concept of an egg. So this particular schema is very complex. The idea of egg is connected to a whole bunch of other ideas that are related to egg in some way. Where they're born, what colours they are, where they come from, the types of animals that lay eggs, what the eggs are made of. They have a delicate shell, that they're nutritious, different ways that you can cook eggs. There's a whole lot of ideas that are interconnected in this particular schema of egg. But do remember that this schema was not, for this particular person, about egg, was not something that was taught to them. This person's schema of egg was not a result of them being taught that all of those concepts. This is just the schema that a person might construct themselves about eggs and everything that they think of as being related to that concept of egg. So schemas are not directly taught. Only knowledge can be taught. And then schemas are constructed by our learners in their own minds. But as I said before, we need to try to influence the way schemas are constructed in our learners' minds by constantly thinking about the connections that our learners are making or not making, and make sure that we really emphasize important connections for them to be able to build more complex and accurate schemas. So schemas should be a constant focus in our teaching and as we plan for teaching and learning. And on one of those, as I said before, schemas can be for lots of different things. Anything can have can sit within a schema in our minds. Higher order thinking skills or behaviors are schemas as well. We don't often think about thinking skills as being concepts in themselves, but they are. They're skills, but they're also schemas that people will have. And we want to make sure if we're teaching our learners the skills of, for example, critical thinking and creative thinking, we as teachers need to know that our learners will have schemas for these skills. And we want to make sure that those schemas are accurate and comprehensive so that they can learn these skills as effectively as possible. We don't want to just assume that our students' schemas are the same as our schemas for these two types of thinking. The first thing I just want to emphasize is that these thinking skills, critical thinking and creative thinking, require learners to have sort of strong, accurate schemas already to think about or to think with. So, of course, we cannot teach thinking skills unless our learners have content, have knowledge to think with. So we always must make sure that if we're trying to teach thinking skills, we must teach relevant knowledge first. That's really important. Thinking skills cannot be taught in a vacuum, and none of us can think very well or think very productively if we don't have a lot of relevant knowledge to think with and to think about. But as I said, thinking skills themselves are schemas as well. So that means that our learners, we need to teach our learners what critical thinking actually means. How is it done? When is it good to do critical thinking and why. So these things might sit, we want these things to be part of the schema that our learners learn about critical thinking. And the same for creative thinking. What does that mean? How is it done? When should it be done? And why should it be done? So we need to make sure that if we are trying to teach these important higher order thinking skills, we don't just assume that by giving students opportunities to think critically or to think creatively, that is going to be enough for them to learn how to do those skills. We need to teach those schemas explicitly, and then our learners will be much more effective in learning how to think critically and how to think creatively. So let's think about that. What is critical thinking and what is creative thinking? In a general, just definition sense, critical thinking means making judgments about ideas, tools, products, but it's making judgments in reasoned ways. That's anybody can make judgments, but that is not necessarily thinking critically unless we're making judgments in ways that we can articulate reasons for. So thinking and evaluating and making judgments in reasoned ways, that's what critical thinking is. We might be making a positive judgment or a negative judgment, or both positive and negative judgments about an idea. As long as we're doing that positive or negative judgment in a reasoned way, that is critical thinking. Critical thinking doesn't necessarily mean making a negative judgment. It can be making a positive judgment. What the word critical means is that it is reasoned. And creative thinking, what is that? Creative thinking means creating new ideas, coming up with new ideas, tools, or products to achieve an intended effect. So not just coming up with something new, but coming up with something new that does something, that achieves a purpose, that achieves an intended effect. So with purpose. The new ideas that our students might come up with, if they're thinking creatively, mostly are not going to be new to the world. We're not necessarily aiming for all of our learners to invent something completely new to the world. That is a rare thing, that happens very rarely. But that's not necessary. We don't need to aim for brand new thinking and products. If the learner can generate ideas that are new to themselves, that still counts as creative thinking that they have done. New ideas that achieve an intended effect, that's creative. Here is a schematic framework for higher order thinking skills. So sort of different schemas a complex schema that would be great if lots of teachers understood and lots of students came to understand. If we could achieve learning that creative thinking is about connecting ideas together, generating ideas, testing ideas, and modifying ideas for an intended effect, for a purpose, and that's what creative thinking means, that would be a great start at teaching creative thinking much better than just saying to our students, be creative. So if we break it down into these specific skills and then explain what's involved in those specific skills. So if we're generating ideas, that can mean imagining something, a new possibility, but it can also mean putting two different ideas together in a new way, is what generating ideas can be. Building on someone else's good idea. sort of adding more detail, adding new ideas to an existing idea is also generating ideas. Knowing how to respectfully propose new ideas is also a good sub-skill of generating ideas. So you can see that these skills and sub-skills are very teachable behaviours. And if we break down those sub-skills so that we can actually teach those skills explicitly as part of, broader schemas about creative thinking and critical thinking, then our teaching of these skills is going to be much better than if we didn't break down the sub-skills, those big ideas, into these practical, focused sub-skills. So thinking about children's schemas for critical and creative thinking and teaching these parts, trying to help students to form complex schemas, understanding that these are all of the parts of creative thinking and critical thinking will help us to teach these skills much more effectively. And of course, under critical thinking, the key skills involved in critical thinking are clarifying information, knowing how to clarify information when we need to, rather than just forgetting to clarify and make sure your understanding is clear first. Drawing conclusions carefully, not just jumping to the first conclusion that pops into your mind. Considering the context and assessing the relevance and so on. Understanding the possible, our possible bias that we might have as we're drawing conclusions. Evaluating ideas, how to do that. Developing criteria for judgment and so on. That's all part of good evaluation of ideas and reasoning our choices as well. So that's one offering of a complex schema or schematic network around higher order thinking skills. Higher order thinking skills are complex schema or complex concepts. They are also abstract ideas. And with any abstract ideas, it's always helpful in our teaching to connect those abstract ideas to concrete examples. And this really does apply to any abstract idea. It's very helpful to give concrete examples. And if we're going to give concrete examples for higher order thinking skills like critical thinking and creative thinking, can be, for example, people in history or people in the news, current affairs that might have displayed critical thinking or creative thinking. As teachers, we can draw attention to those skills that have been displayed, whatever the specific skill is, label the skill. So, for example, say, this is an example of someone evaluating an idea or modifying an idea. That's part of critical thinking, part of creative thinking, and explain the value of those ways of thinking. So giving examples of these abstract concepts, even when you yourself as a teacher engages in examples of critical and creative thinking, we can actually draw attention to what we're doing and talk about our thinking processes and label the skills that we're engaging in, the thinking skills that we're engaging in, and explain why those skills are helpful. And of course, we should also identify when our learners are demonstrating critical thinking or creative thinking skills, really highlighting that that's, what they're doing is an example of a critical thinking skill or a creative thinking skill, labeling those skills and really emphasizing, appreciating that skill and explaining their value. In whatever way we can, it's just really important to not just explain in the abstract what a skill means, but to show concrete examples. And so those concrete examples can be part of the learner's schema for critical thinking and their schema for creative thinking. And that leads me on to the final type of connection that I wanted to talk about today, and that is the important connections between behaviors and feelings, which is the basis of behavioral learning. We can see in this picture here, this child has done a behavior that's not very good. They've made a mess, then they haven't tidied up after themselves, and then they're not really feeling good about that because they're being reprimanded. So they're less likely to do that behavior again. But this behavior where they're feeling good because there's, you know, their teacher or parent is happy with them, they're feeling good about themselves, they're more likely to do that behavior because they're making an association between tidying up and feeling good. That's the essence of behavioral learning, and it's to sort of define that, we say that when doing a behavior becomes associated with a positive feeling, we tend to do that behavior more often. And that is called positive reinforcement. There are other types of reinforcement, and there's the opposite, where if we have a bad feeling associated with a certain behavior, we will be less likely to do that, or we'll do that behavior less frequently. That's called punishment learning. But we're going to focus today on just positive reinforcement, where positive feelings become associated with certain behaviors, and those certain behaviors we do more often. One thing that's really important to note is that positive reinforcement is not the same thing as being rewarded. As teachers, we can reward a child with, it could be praise, or with special sticker or special privilege, some sort of treat. But that's not the same thing as positive reinforcement, unless, number one, the child is made to feel good at that time after having just done that desirable behavior, and if that good feeling is connected to that behavior, happens frequently, happens often enough for that good feeling to become associated with the behavior itself. So just being rewarded or being promised a reward for a certain behavior isn't what behavioral learning is. We can decide as individuals to do a certain behavior because there's going to be a positive consequence, or we can decide not to do something because it's going to be a negative consequence. That's called decision making. That means we're just making decisions about what we are going to do based on what we know is the consequence. I will go to work because then I will get paid and I need money, so I'm making a decision to go to work because I will get paid. That itself is not what behavioral learning is. What in psychology, what behavioral learning means is when we just start to behave in a different way, not necessarily in a conscious way because we're making a decision based on what we know is going to happen next, but we just start to behave in certain ways. We start to do certain behaviors more often, or we stop doing certain behaviors because of associations that can be made at a subconscious level between the behavior and the way we feel. So if as teachers we can try to facilitate good feelings in our learners when they are doing desirable behaviors, learning behaviors, critical thinking, creative thinking, if we can ensure that when they do those behaviors, they have good feelings because of a smile or some praise or a bit more attention, or any way that we can encourage them to feel good when they're doing those behaviors, or immediately after they do those behaviors, that will mean that those those behaviors become things that they are more likely to do more often, even if they're not conscious of making a decision to do that behavior because of the consequence. It could be unconscious for them, but behavioral learning can still happen. And it can happen the reverse because of bad feelings as well, but they can do behaviors less frequently. But it's not necessarily a conscious decision-making process. Behavioral learning happens at a subconscious level, and it needs to be frequent associations or connections between the behavior and feeling good every time the behavior happens, ideally. So the summary is, it doesn't matter what a teacher intends. A teacher can intend to do something that is a reward that will teach students a certain behavior, but it might not necessarily have the intended effect. What for behavioral learning to happen, the learner needs, it's about what the learner feels, and if they feel good, and they feel good after doing a certain behavior, you know, on repeated occasions, that's when behavioral learning can happen, and happens most effectively. So what's that got to do with higher order thinking skills? Well, we know that when we do a behavior you know, doing that behavior becomes associated with a positive feeling, we tend to do that behavior more often. What we need to do is ensure that, first of all, our learners know what the sub-skills of higher order thinking, you know, exactly what are the skills that make creative thinking happen and critical thinking happen. So teach the sub-skills. We need to explain and provide examples, concrete examples of how to do those skills, whether they're our own examples or examples of other people or examples of other children in the classroom. We need to then provide scaffolded or guided opportunities for them to show those skills. And every time they show those skills, we need to help them feel good, and then they will be more likely, they'll do those behaviors more often in the future. So that's the way we apply higher behavioral psychology learning principles to the teaching of higher order thinking skills. So in summary, we talked about 3 different types of connections. The importance of helping our learners make connections between the neurons in their brain. We know that new knowledge is formed in memory in the form of strengthened connections between neurons. So we need to make sure that we are, you know, neuron connections that underpin the construction of mental schemas. That same principle applies to the construction of schemas about thinking skills. So higher order thinking schemas. We know that that good teaching means helping our learners make connections within their mental schemas. Schemas are made of connected concepts or connected ideas. They vary in complexity. Simple schemas can be connected with other schemas to become potentially very complex schemas. And complex schemas require careful guided construction, teacher-guided construction. Schemas about abstract concepts are best learned when, or they're strengthened if we have concrete examples as part of our schemas. So if we're teaching higher order thinking skills, because they are important to teach, we need to make sure we are explicitly teaching what those skills are, give them instructions for how to do those sub-skills, and we need to give them concrete examples that they can put into their schema about what those skills mean, by modelling and labelling those specific thinking skills that are involved in critical and creative thinking. And we need to help our learners make connections between their behaviours and feelings. That's the 3rd type of connections that we focused on. We know that new behaviours are learned when old behaviours are changed, when there are positive behaviour feeling connections. So if when we're trying to teach higher order thinking skills, we need to treat higher order thinking skills as behaviours, and they must be learned like any other behaviours. We need to do more than just provide opportunities. We need to give them frequent and guided opportunities to engage in those skills, and we need to make sure that we positively reinforce those behaviours when they happen by making sure that our learners feel good when they're doing those skills, or as a result of engaging in those behaviours. And that is it from me. Thank you so much for connecting with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'd love to chat about any questions that you have.
Udah. Thank you, Dr. Kylie. What an insightful speech. All right, everyone. Now we are arrived at the questions and answer session. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask directly to our speaker. You can raise your hand or just writing the questions below in the chat. Or if you want to ask in Bahasa Indonesia, you can do so. I will help you to translate into English to the speaker.
I do hope my English was slow enough. I hope I didn't speak too fast.
All right. I'm sorry I interrupt the session. I'm Nina, Dr. Kylie Murphy. So there's two people that has raised their hands. There are Ibu Sri Mel Fayeti and also Mbak Nurul Khairiyah. I think Bu Sri Mel Fayeti, you can please offer your questions to Dr. Kylie Murphy.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Kylie.
Hello.
I appreciate so much about the definition of psychology, mind, feeling, and behavior. Sometimes we just talk about mind and behavior. We not accept the feeling, but now I understand that mind, feeling, and behavior. I just thought about when we talk about high order thinking, how about the differentiate of the student in the class? Because they accept, they make their new skill, new pathway in their neuron is different from others. Gitu. How do you think we should accept all the differentiation? I think that is important for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. That's a very insightful question, because what you're doing is just highlighting differences between learners that obviously have implications for all of our teaching. You know, different learners will have different strengths and weaknesses, and will learn different skills and topic areas more quickly or slowly, and have different talents, different levels of intelligence, how quickly they can process ideas, and clearly different individuals have different propensities to think critically and particularly creatively. There are creative geniuses potentially among our students, and then there are other students who perhaps will, because of their cognitive architecture, they may never be particularly strong creative thinkers or particularly strong critical thinkers. So biologically determined intelligence is something that will impact on, the extent to which students can learn any skill or any knowledge. I guess the role of teachers is to know that even though there are biological differences between the brains of our learners that are going to sort of constrain the full potential that any learner might reach, our role is to help each learner reach their fullest potential, whatever the capacity of their brains are. We want to help them to reach their full potential. And by scaffolding, breaking down what those skills are that are involved in critical thinking and creative thinking, we can make those skills more accessible, more learnable by students who perhaps aren't naturally so talented at thinking in very intelligent, critical ways, or thinking really, constructively and creatively. We can help that learning to be more accessible to all students by breaking down and articulating what are the specific skills involved in thinking creatively or thinking critically. So in that sense, being really clear about the sub-skills that make up critical and creative thinking, and teaching those skills and modeling those skills and reinforcing those specific skills is a more inclusive way of teaching critical and creative thinking than just providing opportunities for critical and creative thinking where students who are naturally talented in those ways may excel and enjoy the process and produce great thinking, but those students who are not so naturally talented don't learn much at all. So I think it's a more inclusive way of teaching critical and creative thinking to break down what the skills are and teach those skills explicitly with examples and scaffolded opportunities. Great question.
All right. Is there any added answer, Dr. Kylie or Ibu Sri Milviati? Do you think that the question has been answered enough from the Dr. Murphy?
Okay, I think it's first. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Professor Sri Milviati. All right, everyone. I think there are another two questions, Dr. Murphy here. There is Nurul Khairiyah Siregar. Nurul, you want to ask your question directly or?
I want to ask my question directly
to
Mrs. Kylie.
Thank you.
Okay, hello, Mrs. Kylie.
Hello.
I want to ask about a schema, a complex schema. When you explain to us about learners should construct their own schema for study, but the teacher still need to teach the student how to make their own schema, right? Okay. I was in my second.
Sorry, I think
think
there might be buffering. I didn't catch all of your question at the end. Sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm sorry, I will ask in my other device. Okay.
All right, we can wait for you. Well, actually, you just lost your connection just now, so we didn't catch your question. Can you please repeat your question again from the very first question, please?
Okay, so Mrs. Kylie, you teach us about the complex schema. Learners should make their own, should construct their own schema for study, but their teacher should teach their student to make their own schema too. In my case, when I was in second grade in my junior high school, my math teacher is not teach us good things. He just give an example and not explain it about math. So in my third junior high school, I don't know anything about math, but I need to do my exam. I want to make a schema, but I don't know anything about the math in my 8th grade. So now I'm a college student, and soon I hope I will be a teacher too. So in a psychology ways, how can the psychology solve the problem like that? And in this case, is the whether the schema things is worth to do for a teacher. I hope you can explain it in efficient and effective way, because in our curriculum in Indonesia, the government make a target by time and also a step for the teacher, like whether the student understand or not, the teacher must make done about the material that her or he start or he teach. Sorry for my bad English. I hope you understand what I asked. Thank you.
I think I understand your question. And if I don't address your question, please let me know. It's interesting that it does take time to teach well. If we've got lots of time pressure or lots of different things to teach and not much time to teach each concept, it's very difficult to teach effectively, because teaching effectively means making sure that we are building on the schemas that the student already has. We need to understand what the learner's initial schema, the relevant concepts, those schemas are, and then make connections and build on those schemas so that their understanding, their knowledge is actually in the form of interconnected concepts rather than just different concepts that don't connect and that we just forget. So when we have learn new concepts that are linked to concepts that we already know, or when a teacher explains how different concepts relate to each other, we are more likely to understand and remember what we've learned than if facts are just taught without making connections to other schemas. And if we have had teaching that has been rushed, where information was presented, an example was given, but not much time was spent making connections with other things that we have already learned, it might seem quicker because, you know, more material can be moved through faster, but it's actually very not very time efficient, because there potentially is quite little learning that's happening, and so it's a very slow way of learning because not much learning is happening at all. Whereas a more effective use of time would be to spend a bit more time explaining how these new concepts link to existing concepts that you understand, asking students to explain what they understand. What does this new concept have to do? Is this similar to, or is this a bit different to what we learned last year or last month? Having students think about those connections doesn't have to take a great deal of time, but the gain in learning, real understanding and getting it to stay in the learner's memory, those gains are huge. So it's a very time efficient, very time effective way of teaching, putting a little bit of time into making sure those connections are clear and having the students think about those connections to build their own schema is a very time effective way of teaching. not doing that is a very time-wasting way of teaching because the teaching is not resulting in high-quality learning. It's not a solution, but yeah, I hope that in your teaching and your future teaching career, you will help your learners to make those connections, to be thinking about their schemas all the time, and rather than feeling that your job is just to teach concepts separately without helping your learner to make connections between the concepts. Has that addressed your comment?
Yes, it's really a good answer for me, whether it's give attention or not.
Aduh.
Gue mati dari tadi hidup Miku.
Yeah, I think it's the best answer for my question because that's need a lot of time because the struggle by the student get for the not good teacher may teach their material. Thank you, Mrs. Kylie. I hope it can help our academic in Indonesia and for me especially as a new student, as a new teacher in the next year.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Nurul, for asking the question. I think your answer is really insightful, and also the question itself is really interesting because somehow as a teacher, if I reflect to me as a lecturer as well, I think we need to need more time to prepare our learning materials to be involved, to be to be applied in a classroom, because I think it's the preparation is only a day or 2 days or 3 days maybe. I think it's not enough if we just prepare those materials in a sort of period of time. So I think it is better, and I really agree with your answers that what we need to do as a lecturers, as a teachers, is prepare and help them to understand not only the concept but also the relationship between one concept and the other, and then help them to study even more. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kylie. And there is also another question from thank you, Rafiq Anazahari. You want to ask your question directly?
Okay, thank you, Kak Nina. Maybe if I need help, can you help me, Kak Nina?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, hi, Dr. Kylie.
Hello.
First of all, thanks for the time. And first of all, maybe my question is a little bit out of context. So here I want to ask about the parenting. The parenting between the Asian parenting and the Western parenting there is a gap on there. There's a difference between Asian and Western parenting. Here the thing about Asian parenting is most of Asian parent is having the rule of the house. What I mean here is you have to listen what your parent say, what your parent do. It's about the Asian parenting. Or I could say there is a less communication between the children and the parent. And the difference between Western parenting is the parent and the children having a many communication, and that's why I like Western communication, and I prefer that. So I want to ask about the behavior that Asian parents do, because it's like hereditary. You know what I mean? It's like they take the behavior from their parent, and always like that. So is that
like generation to generation gak sih maksudnya?
Yes, generation to generation. So I want to ask about is that even a schema? Because it's like there's a behavior part on there. Okay, thanks. Just that, Dr. Kylie. Thanks a lot.
That is my pleasure. That is a very impressive question. That truly very impressive question. The answer is yes. The way the parenting behaviors are absolutely schemas. You know, your parents, my parents, me as a parent, we all have, whether we're conscious or not, we have schemas for how to parent and how to parent in certain situations, and we will fall back to our schemas for how to act in different situations. And those schemas are largely learned through modeling. You know, what we see being done forms our schema about how to parent our child in this situation, and how to parent a child at this age and how to parent a child at that age. Absolutely, that they are classic behavioral schemas that have been learned. And parenting schemas can be learned behaviorally as well if we engage in parenting behaviors that seem to have a good outcome and that we feel good about. We're more likely to do those parenting behaviors in the future. And parenting behaviors that don't have a good outcome, we're less likely to do in the future. It becomes very interesting, though, because there are this is another interest area of mine, parenting. Sometimes as a parent, we can feel good engaging in a certain parenting behavior. But although it might feel good at the time, for example, to assert our authority and to feel powerful, or it might feel good at the time to just give in and let go, just not try to be in charge and just to let our child do whatever they want to because that's easier. That immediate feeling is good, whether it's powerful and authoritative, you know, that feeling of power and having your child obey you because you're powerful, or giving in and being very permissive and letting your child, you know, have or do whatever they want. That feeling, that good feeling, means that we will keep doing those behaviors, even though the actual outcome of those behaviors after the immediate feeling of feeling relief or feeling powerful is good. And I think that this is a great example of what that point I was trying to make. It's not the outcome or the consequence of the behavior that makes us learn to do something more often. It's the feeling that we have when we're doing the behavior, and we will keep doing behaviors that felt good even if the consequence is not good. So that's a big big influence on how we parent is how we feel in the moment. And if it feels good at the time, we will keep doing those behaviors. And also, if we have seen parenting and it seems to work, we watch other people parenting, we will parent in those ways as well. Modeling is another way that we learn behaviors. But yeah, and parenting, absolutely, parenting behaviors are schemas, and different schemas for parenting develop in different cultures, and different ways of parenting can be more or less desirable and effective depending on the culture that it's happening in. So it's very relative, and I think in Western cultures, parenting that has the parents are in charge and have confidence, and they are authoritative, not punitive or harsh, but authoritative. They are in control. They're making the decisions and setting limits on what the children can do, but also warm and communicative and respectful. That type of parenting, a mix of having authority but also being warm, that kind of parenting tends to work best in Western cultures. And maybe I'm not sure, I'm not in other cultures, and I'm not so familiar with, I'm not sure, maybe different parenting styles are more effective and desirable in other cultures. That's an interesting, you know, discussion for another day. Thank you. Great question.
All right. How, Mas Tengku Rafiq, do you
Okay,
think that the answer has addressed your question?
okay, Dr. Kylie. I think I'll take note of it. And thank to kakak-kakak moderator for helping me a little bit of translation. Thank you.
All right, no worries. All right, Dr. Kylie, still there are a lot of questions right here. There are 3 more questions. Do you mind if we all ask each question?
Sure.
All right. All right. First one, maybe from Juan Sebastian Sinaga. Juan, do you want to ask the question directly to the speaker, or do you
Thank
need
you,
my
Kak
help to
Nina.
translate? All right.
Thank you, Kak Nina.
Yes, please.
So, hello, Dr. Kylie.
Hello.
Dr. Kylie is a lecturer, right? Each student has their own level of ability. How can you equate high order thinking skill to the student? For example, a student, he has a difficulty of studying, so his academically is still far behind his friend. So how you can equate high order thinking skills to his students?
Excellent question. Thank you very much. Higher order thinking is not necessarily, look, certainly the more naturally intelligent a learner is, or a person is, the more able they are going to be able to engage in critical and creative thinking in, you know, truly valuable, constructive ways. There absolutely are differences in intellectual ability between, or intellectual potential between learners. Absolutely, yes. However, that doesn't mean that higher order thinking is something that you need to have more intelligence to do. So if we go back to, if you think about, and I might actually just share my screen again. Let's see, share that one. If I go back to a breakdown of the sub skills that make up higher order thinking, these sub skills are things that people can do without being highly intelligent and without necessarily knowing an enormous amount of content. You don't need to be an expert and to know a large amount of content in depth in order to, for example, make connections between, you know, with another concept that you already know, or to, you know, build on another idea, you know, have an idea to build on someone else's idea, or to predict what's going to happen and then do, you know, conduct an experiment, try something to see what effect it has. These skills are all very doable, particularly if teachers provide guided opportunities. These skills are all very doable by learners who are not necessarily expert in terms of, you know, content knowledge. They may not, all learners won't necessarily engage in all of these specific thinking skills in highly impressive, you know, amazing ways, but that doesn't mean that they can't do these skills and be taught and encouraged to engage in these skills. And I think that even though all learners won't necessarily become highly critical, creative beings. You know, most can, but even though all learners might not be able to reach that, you know, a high level of critical and creative thinking, I think it's beneficial to try to teach all students to do these skills, because it's better for all learners to learn to try to think in these ways than to not ever be encouraged to think for themselves at all. So even though, yes, there are differences in terms of the potential that our students will reach, I think that we shouldn't keep, you know, reserve thinking skills only for the most intelligent and most knowledgeable students. I don't think that's a wise thing to do. I think we should be trying to teach these thinking skills to all students so that they can all do these skills at the, you know, the highest level that they can. It's certainly not necessary to have a lot of intelligence and knowledge in order to do these thinking skills, even though they are called higher order thinking skills. Higher order thinking skills are higher order simply because you need some knowledge first. So you need to just know some concepts first. That's your lower level, you know, lower level knowledge, just being able to retrieve some facts. But then if you've got some knowledge, you can do the thinking, the next level up thinking with that knowledge. You don't need to have a high level of intelligence to do higher order thinking skills. You just need to have some base level or foundational knowledge. And as teachers, we can all teach some knowledge and then encourage thinking skills with that knowledge, even with students who have not got very high levels of intelligence.
All right. Thank you for the explanation, Dr. Kylie. Juan, what do you think? Is it clear enough, the explanation?
Clear enough. Thank you, Kak Nina. Thank you, Dr. Kylie.
All right. Thank you, Juan. I think this is going to be our last question due to the time is not longer to be end. So I will accept one more question that should be for Sultan Surya Darpan. Sultan.
Thank you, Kak Nina. Hello, Dr. Kylie.
Hello.
I have one question about nearly connections. How the connection between early life experience and the formation of pattern of neural connections in the brain affect long-term psychological development and function? About I think just that I really bingung apa ya?
Maybe you can ask it using bahasa Indonesia. I will help you to translate it to English. Bahasa Indonesianya apa pertanyaannya?
Bagaimana hubungan antara pengalaman hidup awal dan pembentukan pola hubungan saraf di otak memengaruhi perkembangan dan fungsi psikologis jangka panjang, Kak?
All right, thank you. So the question is, how can our early experience in life can influence, you know, the development of our mental development and also the long-term life? Is there any relationship? If it is yes, so what is the influence for the long-term, our long-term life in the next, you know, in the next 10 or 15 years ahead?
The excellent question, really important question. The experiences, including the learning experiences of young children before the age of 5, even before the age of 2, are actually really important and do sort of to some extent set the potential for learning longer term. There is enormous, it's called synaptogenesis, you know, the connections between neurons that I was referring to in the lecture. Those connections, the little gaps between neurons, are called synapses, and there are there's an explosion of new synapses, new connections between neurons that happen at around the age of 2, and then again actually in puberty, but at around about the age of 2 there is a lot of branching of the neurons. Dendrites and axons branch a lot, and there are so many more connections that can be made if the environment is able to be, you know, if the child's environment is stimulating enough, there's lots of rich and varied stimulation and opportunities for connections to be made between those neurons that are branching, the scope for learning and cognitive development, in other words, more connections between neurons in the brain, there is a huge scope for that to happen in those first couple of years, but you know, particularly around 2 years of age. But if those connections aren't actually activated because the environment, the learning environment, is not rich and varied, then those synapses can be lost, and that's called synaptic pruning. And so that that growth in connections in the brain that could have happened might not happen because the young child's environment wasn't stimulating enough, and then the brain is forever limited in those connections thereafter. So it's actually really critical, stimulating environments where the child can make connections between things they hear and see, and physically playing with objects, making lots of connections because of, you know, based on sensory stimulation, is in a very real way, it does impact on the infant, the toddlers, the young child's brain development in a way that will affect their learning in their future lives. So professionals who work with young children in early childhood education, their role is so important for setting up young learners' brains for better learning in their future years. Yeah, there's absolutely the early years education is really critically important. It can be, if opportunities aren't provided in early years, you can work with a child, and development and learning still can happen, but it will be harder and require more intensive intervention later on, if the early childhood years weren't optimal in terms of learning. So very important question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kylie, about explanation. I think I really understand. So I think, thank you to Kak Nina juga.
No worries. All right. All right. Thank you, Pak Sultan Surya Darman Siragan, and all of the people that have asked the question. All right. Dr. Kylie, it's the end of our discussion. Actually, there are a lot of still questions. I believe that everyone still has several questions to be asked to Dr. Kylie, but you know, the time is going to end. We have a limit time for this discussion. Maybe next time we can do another session with Dr. Kylie. Yeah. Maybe we can arrange it next time so we can involve everyone here and you can join us for the discussion. All right, Dr. Kylie, I will return the session to the previous moderator, Elviani. Silahkan, Elviani.
Hello everyone, what an interesting question and answer session. Thank you, Dr. Murphy, for providing such a clear explanation, and of course for Miss Nina help us to doing question and answer session. All right, Dr. Kylie, before you leave the room, we have something to be present to you to show our gratefulness and appreciation to your willingness and involved in our event.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. That was, look, I've thoroughly enjoyed today. It has been so nicely organized, and the culture, the politeness, and the curiosity that I've seen today is just so impressive and heartwarming. And I'd be delighted to join you all again. It's been just a very lovely experience. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. I'm Nina. I'm from Faculty of Education. On behalf of the lectures from the Faculty of Education, we really appreciate your involvement. We are really grateful to welcome you, and we really thank you enough to attend this event and then to be the speaker, so we can learn more about high order thinking skills, especially the application of educational psychology. Thank you so much. Hopefully we can have another collaboration next time.
Lovely. Thank you so much. All the best, everybody.
All the best.
Thank you, Dr. Kylie. All right, everyone, that's the end of our discussion, and I have several conclusions of the material. That one, schema is the foundation of students' high-order thinking skills. Two, the high-order thinking skills can be optimally developed by the active roles of teachers during students' development period. Three, as teachers, we need to provide a safe and good environment for students to develop their high-order thinking skills. All right, everyone, I will return this session at 2:01. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Elpiani, for moderating our general lecture today. Ladies and gentlemen, now it is the end of today's event. We would like to say thank you so much to all participants who join us today, and also special thanks to our speaker, Dr. Kylie Murphy, for your inspiring talk. May each of us take something from the lecture. And last but not least, I am Puan Audia Zahra, and on behalf of Elpiani Sinaga, we thank you so much for your attention. If there are words that are less pleasing, we deeply apologize to you. Let us close the general lecture by saying Alhamdulillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. See you later and have a nice day.
Tu dia malulu. Itu dia malulu. agar ku